Hello everyone, welcome back to Planet Zoo, and welcome back to Arcadia. In today's episode we're going to be doing a little bit of development in the Old Town main street, which I mentioned last week, but I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I haven't had a lot of time this week to actually record some Planet Zoo content, so I'm going to develop the first portion of this, and then I want you guys in the comments to tell me what kind of shops, buildings, that sort of thing you would like me to design within this Old Town main section. So I'm going to start today by building a tailor's and a barber's, and then we're going to do a little bit of work on some of the other building parts of this main L-shaped building, one of 4 buildings within this main section of Old Town. And then you guys, in the comments, give me some suggestions. So this could be like a pie shop or a tavern or something like that. And I will do them for the next episode. And we'll begin with a little walkthrough of what has been developed within Old Town. Or maybe I will just make another episode designing and building things within this little section. So let's dive into the speed build, and I will talk a little bit about how we developed this entire area into our brand new and improved Old Town, if that makes any sense at all. So, to begin with, we're taking out our plaster wall here and putting in a plaster panel. Now, the reason I want to do this is because plaster walls are built on the grid. The panels we have free movement of. And the reason I want to do this is I just want to set back the entrance to this building a tiny little bit so that it doesn't stick out onto the main pathway. Now, this is present in a lot of old Tudor style buildings within the UK. They'll have this nice frontage, and then there's a gradual kind of increase in how the upper levels of the building stick out onto a main street. And the reason this was kind of done could be for multiple different reasons, but one of them is that the entranceways above, we used to just throw our waste out into the street. And I guess the reason that this was done is so you could throw your waste out of your top window and it wouldn't land on your head. Or something like that, maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of reasons why we did that sort of thing, but that's probably a little funny thing that I wanted to talk about anyway. And I'm getting off track now because I'm thinking about people throwing their crap out into the street. So we wanted to find an appropriate door, and all I could think of was these Arctic wood doors, and then we continued the masonry work all the way along so that it kind of all matches up. But then we're left with this nice little doorway that goes into the building itself, and it doesn't actually interfere with the walkways, so we're not going to get people wandering through and clipping through bits of brickwork and stuff, which I really don't like to see. Obviously, you know, it happens sometimes, but I try to minimize it as much as possible, and also it just adds an extra dimension onto the decoration of a building. So we're going to put a little window box in here as well, just putting some mulch down into these classical planters that I decided to use. And the thing that I don't like about these is you can't actually fit like a planter within them. But it seems very silly to then just put mulch and plants in here as well. Like, you would imagine the mulch would just fall through the gaps, so it would be nice to have some sort of planter option. Anyway, I played around with the types of flowers and stuff I would put in here because we have a very small space here. So azaleas seem to be the best ones to use, and then these dwarf cornels were the ones that stuck out a little bit more. So we left them in just to give a little pop of greenery. And then the next thing was probably my favourite part of this build, actually. It's these little bits of wood that are on an angle that are very popular in old style shops in the UK, kind of like Tudor sort of things. And what would happen was that there'd be these bits of wood that kind of make up part of the framework of a building, and you'd then have the signage or the type of shop it was painted on the doorway. And this is still something that's pretty popular in the UK, but we don't have it as much now. But when you see like a new shop that has had a sign erected on this kind of area, very likely underneath that sign will be this old woodwork that they have not taken out, because sometimes it forms part of the actual structure of the building, like it is built on like a part of the main building frame, and it costs far too much to just remove it and reinforce it, so they'll leave it behind. So it's really interesting when you see a new shop going over a shop that's already been there for a while. They'll take down that old exterior sign and it'll reveal, and sometimes they still have their original kind of signage on. Most of it's from the 60s or 70s or something, but it's still it was a very popular kind of method of signposting your shops or businesses for quite some time. And it makes me think of like cobblers and old tailor shops and stuff like that. And another thing that was pretty popular was to have metal bars across your doors, across your windows as a security. So we're going to put them in where our exhibits are, as if these exhibits have been installed in these old buildings, and it just all adds into that recycled and like law-friendly area that we're trying to create here. Now, I had a lot of problems with this once I'd put it in. Guess why? Yeah, that's right. I kept clicking on the exhibit because I'd sunk this so far in that it was interfering with the window of the exhibit, so I had to do this every time I wanted to move something around, which made duplicating that piece so difficult. Now, what I didn't think of was I could actually have grouped these separately and then, you know, put them in place. But never mind. We're making a Barber's here. I haven't mentioned that yet. I mean, I did at the start of the video, but I've not mentioned it since. So the Barber's is getting its sign put on that little sign that we've got right there. I'm just sinking it in so it's not floating off it. It would be nice to have a few more fonts to play with in Planet Zoo. I never really thought that would be a thing for me. But yeah, I'd really like a few more different fonts for doing stuff like this. And then, of course, Barber's, traditional old Barbers, had the red and white sign. And we're going to be putting that in. Luckily, we have these posts from the European pack that are actually made for gondolas, I think they were originally for in the game. But we're going to put these in because they're really cool. And, you know, it's a Barber sign. Funny fact about Barber signs, actually, they represent a number of different things. So the actual original design is red, blue, and white stripes. And that was because they performed surgery on customers as well, like tooth extractions and stuff. And the pole had like a brass basin at the top, which actually represented the vessel in which they kept leeches. And the bottom represented the basin that received the blood. So the pole itself is the staff that the patient gripped during the procedure to encourage blood flow. And the twinned pole motif is most likely related to the staff of the Greek god of speed and commerce, Hermes. So there's a lot of stuff kind of behind that. And basically, the reasons that this occurred was because in 1163, the clergy was banned from the practice of surgery, and from then on, physicians were separated from surgeons and barbers. So it all kind of changed very rapidly over time, and eventually the basic kind of thing came that the surgeons used coloured stripes to indicate that they were prepared to bleed their patients, which is why it was red, set bones or pull teeth, which was white, or give you a shave if nothing more was needed, which was the blue. So there's a lot of meaning behind those signs, and it's really an interesting fact. Anyway, back to this build that we're doing. So we're just continuing what we've got, and I did end up having to move my exhibits out of there because it became so frustrating, but it was pretty easy to just lift them up and then set them back in as long as I removed the paths that were automatically created afterwards. I know they don't connect to any other paths within the zoo, but the way the guests sometimes kind of move around, it wouldn't surprise me if someone ended up getting lost inside an exhibit somewhere. Once they get in, they're just waving their arms around being like, help me, I can't get out. One slight management issue I need to talk to you about is my finances plummeted quite rapidly recently because my train station broke down and I didn't realise I had not set a janitor up to go down there and repair it. So I had a lot of guests trapped in Old Town, unable to get out because the trains had failed. And of course, no one was buying tickets because they'd known the station had failed, so my money just went and went and went. Luckily, it's back on track now. But yeah, that was a little bit of a strange situation that I couldn't work out for quite some time while I was doing a little bit of management. I'm not going to be doing any management today. We're just going to do this build, and I'm going to continue talking while I'm at it. You can see there's a lamppost a little bit further at the top of your screen as well that I've moved so I could do this building. And I'm going to redesign the actual lampposts and street light decor in the zoo as well. That's going to be just moved a little bit, and we're going to freshen that up a touch with some greenery and planters and stuff. Next, I want to put windows on. Now, because these buildings all have very similar footprints, well, exactly the same footprints, just at different angles, the windows and stuff in here and the colours of the plaster are going to change. And as I've already said, I will also be changing the layout of some of the buildings just to give a little bit of differentiation. But in here, obviously in medieval times, Tudor times, what have you, when these buildings would have been originally created, there was no real planning permission type stuff. We didn't have that much of an advanced system for that sort of thing. So if people needed a window, they would just knock a hole through their wall and then put a window in there. And your local carpenter or what have you would do it. So a lot of buildings in the UK that are this age have windows in very strange places and they're not uniform at all. There's actually a very popular pub that has sadly fallen into a little bit of disrepair near where I live called the Cooperage. And some of the windows there, that's actually one of the oldest pubs in the UK. It's closed down at the moment and is being looked after, but it is listed because of its age and the heritage value it has to the country and my region in particular. And I used to go to gigs there and stuff when I was a lot younger, but it is a beautiful, beautiful building and a perfect example of this whole mishmash of windows and stuff. Obviously coming into modern times with mold and damp and everything and the need to ventilate, it's not great to have windows just plastered everywhere. You kind of really need to be careful of that sort of thing, but the Cooperage is a fine example of that sort of thing. And here I wanted to kind of do something that was a little bit of a boarded up window situation, like as if some glass had been smashed through. And I tried a number of methods, as you can see here, me struggling with these wooden panels, but it all looked so manufactured and I really didn't like that. So I ended up not doing it after practicing a little bit, but you can see what we're going for. I did try to put a little bit of backlight in there as well, just to see if that helped any, and none of it seemed to sit right. And I'm wondering if I'd put like a little bit of vine coverage or something in there as well, but nothing seemed to work for me. And I thought rather than spending so much time kind of trying to get it to work, just abandon it and move on with the build. So, moving on with the build, we duplicated a couple of things from our actual vendors here because I wanted to create kind of like a little media wall here, advertising the Kowalski's horses. And I tried a number of different things to go in here, and none of them would really work with the actual photograph that I plan to use for the Kowalski's horse. So I had to go with a smaller sized TV screen and then change the colour of the plaster background to black. You can see me just going through a few different options here because I hadn't originally decided that these were going to advertise the Kowalski's horse. And then I remembered the wonderful thumbnail from the Kowalski's horse episode that I discovered, so I decided to use that instead. Now what I had thought about doing was just actually tailoring an image so that it fit to a certain size and timing it and adjusting it so that the actual image fit in. But that would have taken a lot of work and I wasn't sure I was ready to do that. Another thing I've thought about doing is looking for little silhouettes and stuff of like media where there's recordings and it's a little bit of motion, and putting that in so it looks like there's activity going on in these buildings. But that's a long way off and I don't think I'm quite ready to do that now. And then we moved to our Hats Fantastic, where I'd forgotten to put any signage in at all, and then we started changing these to a colour that was appropriate for both Hats Fantastic and Bernie's Bakes, because I'm going to go with the idea that this is all one building. So green seemed to be the best thing to do. I had to make a little bit of an adjustment to avoid the overlaps, which didn't make too much of a difference because I end up eventually colouring the whole thing. Because actually what needs to happen is this tailor needs to continue on at the back, because the back of the tailor backs out onto our solar panel there. So we put in the framework for this Bernie's Bakes, and obviously it looks like you go in that door and you're right into the actual shop itself, but we're going to pretend that that's actually what happens, and there's a small corridor of some description in there. Or we could just imagine that this has all been bricked up on the other side and this is simply just a bit of decoration, kind of like a little scene that you would see at a theme park of some sort, you know. And we carried on the theme that we were going with throughout, changed the colour a little bit to a bit of a lighter green, because we always go with a darker colour on the top and then a lighter one underneath it. And then here we're going to leave this sign blank. We could imagine that this was part of an old, like, you know, it could just be a tailor of some description as well. So as you can see, we've coloured our tailor at the back there, and that now merges perfectly with the rest of this building. Now what I want to do here is hide the solar panel and the staff path as best I can. And the reason I want to do that is because I don't really have a problem with the solar panels. I think they look good enough. There's not really an issue with them. But you can't cover them, obviously, because when you do, they don't receive power anymore. They need access to sunlight, which means hiding them within your environment is very difficult. Now, you don't have to, because the guests don't actually mind the appearance of them because they're so environmentally friendly, but I don't particularly like seeing them, and I prefer to have all of my amenities and stuff well hidden. So we're going to make a little garden here that was part of this building, and this is where we're going to start seeing different patterns emerging in Old Town. And this took a while. There was a lot of tweaks to do here, but I wanted to use the trellis from the badger habitat that's actually opposite. I think it's opposite anyway, unless I've changed to a different area. Yes, that's the badger over there. I can see it in the background. And then we just needed to match this up nicely. Now, this was difficult. It was tough to get the curve right, and we had to do a lot of like moving around and just miniature adjustments to get everything working. And as you can probably see, I've cut a massive hole through the building there, and that is how the staff are actually going to access this solar panel. I don't want them to be going from the public facing pathway into this. So what you're seeing here is a public kind of pathway used by everybody, but the area through the building is actually staff path. So only staff can actually get to this area, even though anyone could use this path once they were there. But the staff path prevents any public going in this direction. And the reason I did that is because I don't like the staff path. I don't like how it looks on like normal terrain like this. I would like to cover it, but again, we're outdoors here, so I don't really see the need to have some sort of covering on it. I just want a natural path, if that makes any sense whatsoever. And here you can see we're starting to get our issues with where it's all matching up. I think by the end of it I got this pretty good, but we did try a lot of variations before we finally got it right. And then of course we had to put a top on there so that the trellis here has something to fit into. I tried multiple different variations on it, as you can see, with like lots of different hedges going in there to maybe stack on top and bring that up to make life easier, but nothing seemed to work. So we're going to jump ahead and it's going to be complete as if by magic. So here we are, moving in with our flowers now. We're going to put in some asters and then a few other little flowering plants and bushes and stuff to make it look like this was a little garden of some description. And this is just going to be an entrance, kind of like gravel pathway going into the building, which we will eventually frame with our usual European bridge support stuff, because I really like the effect that that gives. It's a nice bright white colouring to it, so it's really cool, and it really lines those pathways very well. We put in some tall cypress trees to continue our theme, and then I made a little stonework path going to the building itself. We continued our asters going all the way through here, and then put down a few alpine currants just to hide the path as much as possible. The azaleas coming back in as well, just to cover up some of the extra little spots and make a nice little framework for this pathway itself. Laid down a few rocks that were sticking up out of the gravel path, and then put in a few other options for our final touches. Final? I'm not quite sure what's going on with my voice today. It's been a long week. I did put a little bit of ivy on the solar panel. I thought that would be really cool, and then decided to throw in a few bushes to cover up the actual main plinth of it. So it just kind of looks like this natural thing that's kind of nature's grown back a little bit, and I think it's a really cool idea. Moving on into the actual building itself, this just had to be a simple like recopy and like texture work on what was going on inside the building itself. I just wanted to make this really basic. We're not really looking at much in here, and I'm not expecting anyone to kind of come looking, so it's not an issue if it's very bare bones in here. But I did want to at least put a roof on it and make sure that all of the foliage and stuff was hidden. We went with stone in here because we would imagine the interior of these buildings is actual solid stone, and the plaster is just on the outside of the building to protect it from the elements. And then we carried on moving our stonework around, and as you can see, we've got a little bit of terrain pushing through where it's auto adjusted, and we're going to adjust the flooring in here to better like transition so that there's no landscaping coming through our floor. But it was just a case of getting all of the building work right to begin with, so there's a lot of adjustments and stuff going on here. And then we coloured the plaster here as well. Again, this one has to match the Street Fox coffee theme because it's part of that building, and we're going to imagine this is a slightly larger kind of area. It's a slightly different colour from the rest of the building there, but it doesn't distract too much. The one thing I don't want to do with this new area is make too many of the colours vibrant. There's got to be earthy tones, so it's got to be kind of pastels and stuff, and not have too much of a like wow factor. I'm not here to make like neon signs and stuff. I really want to keep this traditional look about the place. So it's really important that we maintain that throughout. So when I'm going to be designing any of your suggested buildings, we're going to be trying to stick to those themes as well. Then we put down our staff path. So this is what's going to prevent guests from walking through, and just made a few adjustments, bringing some of the wood more in line with the rest of the build. And then I coloured the plaster in here as well. Now, I'm not sure I want to keep the plaster coloured. I may actually cover it all up with some stonework panels instead, because this is where it gets a little bit tricky when you're having multiple buildings with different types of plaster, and I don't really want that to be a thing, so that's something to think about moving forward. The next thing I did, I was having some trouble getting my adjustments to work by using the actual Arctic wood pathways, so I used panels instead, and that solved my issues. Now we do have a little bit of overlap where the staff path actually joins up with the rest of the outside pathing, and I do solve that eventually. It just wasn't a priority at the time. So we're looking good. We're just making some slight adjustments to the timber framework in here on the building. Now, remembering when I first put this in, it was just very much a rush job when I was originally designing Old Town. So all of these little adjustments are going to be happening as we move to the more intricate design work on it as well. And then we had to move our white path trims right the way into Old Town. And this is really exciting because it's starting to look more complete now, and things are really taking shape. I'm really looking forward to like fleshing out the rest of this central district, because it's just gonna be a really nice thing to see when we look back on the original videos, the first kind of experience of Old Town. The one thing I do need to mention is this path has warped slightly, and that's so frustrating. So I may need to put a little bit of weeds or something in there poking through just to disrupt that a touch. Or I may use some of the moss textures, the decals, to actually cover up that hole and make it look like there's just some leaf litter or something on there. In this area, I don't actually want to see any landscaping poking through, so when paths auto adjust like that, it can be quite frustrating, but that's literally just because of the way that the build has auto adjusted to items that I've put in place. So there's not a lot I can do about it other than cover it up with something. I could paint it stone using the terrain brush, but I'm not going to do that. And as I came around, I noticed that this plaster was sticking out on the opposite side, which we can't have either. No clipping here, thank you very much. And then we carried on adjusting and duplicating and putting in our path barrier. I really like the way this is starting to take shape, though. It's really pleasing to see, and unlike my other franchise modes, I'm still feeling inspired every time I boot it up, and I'm still looking forward to coming in and developing it and stuff. I've already got ideas for the underground monorail system I'm going to be building. That one's going to be a pretty tough episode though, so when I do finally finish off Old Town and we start moving into that new district, that one might take a little bit of time, but I'm excited nonetheless to actually have a bridge going out of Old Town into our metro system. And there you can see our final product. I was really happy with how this one turned out. Obviously there's a couple of touches like you're going to see on the other side of this building, that there's a few more things I could do to finish it off. As you can see, that area kind of where the Street Fox coffee sign is hasn't had much fleshing out done to it, so we're gonna have to do a little bit more work on that to really finish it off. But these areas give you a little snapshot of what we're looking to create here in Old Town. And now guys, it's over to you. So leave me a comment on the types of stuff you want to see in Old Town, what kind of old style shops you would like to see me create, and I will either do another episode where we finish off all 3 of the other exterior buildings here in Old Town, or next episode we'll be starting something new and I will already have completed all of the buildings. But I'd quite like to spend a little bit more time on this one, so it's looking more likely that you're going to see a brand new episode where we finish off the Old Town Middle District. And any other ideas you would have for the zoo, including some animals that you would like to see in this area, as long as they fit in with the theme, I'm happy to do them. Obviously, I have the llamas coming up at some point, but it would be nice to have another couple of suggestions just in the bank so that I can put those out there as well. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for your time. If you are new here, please consider subscribing. I do a lot of Planet Zoo content amongst others, and I'd love to have you along for the ride. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.